I'll say this, there's no such thing as passive income in trucking. Trucking is not a passive. This is not one of those industries
Totally.
where it's hands-on. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Welcome to This Week in Trucking, the podcast that tells you what you need to know about the trucking market for the week in 30 minutes or less. This week, we're talking to Adam Wingfield, founder of Innovative Logistics Group and seasoned industry professional with over 20 years of experience in the trucking business. Thanks so much for being here, Adam. Awesome. I've been following your work with small carriers for quite a while now, but I wanted to first understand what got you into the trucking industry. What is the history of your profession in the industry, and why are you focused on small carriers in particular?
Take all the way back when I was a little kid. I used to have the dining room table used to be full of Matchbox truck and trailers. I had a whole city and whole warehouse set up. I had trucks and trailers all over the dining room table. I was always obsessed with trucks and diesel. And I grew up in a small town in South Carolina, Altoona, South Carolina. And, quite frankly, that was when I was around at all times. And I remember when I was 11 years old, and my uncle one day left some things in his truck. He was a truck driver for a petroleum company that was local in a town called Kingstree, South Carolina. He left some items in his truck, and he was like, "Hey, I got to go run back to the truck and go pick some things out." So I was like, "Sure, I'll ride with you." So we hopped in his Ranger pickup truck and rode on out to the terminal in Kingstree, and it was pouring down raining. I'll never forget the day. It was pouring down raining, and we got into his truck. It was about 150, 200 yards from his pickup. And he said, "Hey," we hop inside, and he said, "Hey, you want to get behind the wheel?" Got behind the wheel, and he said, "Hey, start it up." And turned the wheel and started it up. And it was just, if you've ever sat in behind a truck before and starting the engine, it just gives you a little energy vibe that you can't replicate. At that time, being an 11-year-old boy, he was just walking me through the process. He's like, "Hey, put it in gear, let your foot off the clutch, and just idle it through." And from that point, I idled it all the way across the yard. And it was just one of those things where you just never forget. And that's how I started. It got in my blood, and it started from that point. As soon as I could get my CDL, which was when I turned 21 years old, when I got my CDL, it was one of the things that I was passionate about. People in class with me were that whole, "Hey, what do you want to be when you grow up?" You had the doctors, you had your lawyers, you had everything else. And I just want to be a truck driver. So I started from that point. It kind of grew.
That's awesome. What a cool story. I am still at the wheel of a moving truck. I've been in a lot of trucks before and visited with our clients a lot before, but I got to do that. I have been thinking about getting my CDL to what the actual experience is of driving one of those trucks.
If you get a CDL,
it's one of those.
I want you to get a manual. You don't do an automatic, do it in a manual.
Okay. I don't even know how to drive a manual car.
That's even better.
Okay. I mean, and my mom has actually said, "Yeah, you should do that," because not only is it going to give you a good perspective on the industry, but it's also just a really great skill to have in life, to be able to know that and have the appreciation of how to drive, how to be conscious when you're driving down the highway and you have fellow drivers who are 80,000 pounds down the expressway at 60 miles an hour, to have an appreciation for what it means, the responsibility that it means to drive one of those.
That's right.
So you shared something on LinkedIn the other day that got quite a bit of attention. It was a sign that a driver took a picture of just a couple of weeks ago at a receiver saying that the current wait time unloaded is 12 to 16 hours. Sorry for the inconvenience. As really infuriating that was to read, you actually made a really good point that there are dire consequences for drivers arriving late to a delivery. How is it that receivers are able to make drivers wait that long and make them lose hundreds or even sometimes thousands of dollars in valuable time with little to no consequences?
That's an age-old question, right? So those are one of those things, and that was the reason why I wanted to surface that, because when you look in the trucking industry, it's one of the antiquated industry was dominated by small carriers, right? So 96% of the trucking industry is occupied by carriers that own less than 10 trucks. So we're talking about the majority of your capacity that's coming out in terms of being available for available trucks. The majority of capacity have small operation. And unfortunately, it's not well regulated in terms of the things that really matter. So when you look at the ATRI and ATA, they're always doing research, and their research, some of the things they look at, hey, what are the top 10 driver concerns? And you always hear this truck parking, But detention time is a major issue. And I'm going to tell you why it's one of the biggest issues. Studies show that with detention, for every hour of time that a driver is actually detained at a shipper, that increases the chance of an accident. Because you've got a driver who's frustrated. Now you've got a driver who's electronically mandated by the ELD to be able to move forward. Now he's pressed for time, and that creates that urgency behind the wheel and behind the pedal. So it's one of those safety things. But the problem is, like, from a shipper standpoint or a receiver standpoint, in this particular case, there's no accountability. Our broker partners out there, I feel at times, they want to walk on eggshells and don't want to say, hey, Mr. Receiver or Mr. Shipper, hey, you can't hold my truck up because it's holding my guy up. And one of the biggest problems is that, look, if you detain me and say, I'm sorry, hey, it's nothing I can do about it. Say you're the broker on my next load. You don't care about what's happening to me about this 12 to 16 hours. You're going to be like, hey, you're my truck. You committed to me. Why aren't you at my pickup? Because I've got a customer that's got to be taken care of. So not only are you impacting the overall ability for me to operate for that day. So when you talk about 12 to 16 hours, that's ridiculous. Because then what will happen is that the broker will say, okay, let me go back to the customer and let's see what they're going to pay in detention. How are you going to tell me what it costs my business is paying my truck? And then it just behooved me. So when you don't tie a financial consequence to an action, then that doesn't prevent the action from reoccurring. So if I'm a driver and you say, hey, you know what? If you don't accept macro points, I'm docking the rate card for $250. And you know what you're going to do as a broker? You're going to do just that, right? But there is no, hey, if you detain my truck for over 2 hours, and we're talking about 12 to 16 hours, and I'm painting a small picture. So typically a truck can generate anywhere between, let's say, on average, about $800 to $1,000 a day within a shift. And sometimes a lot more, sometimes a lot less. But let's use $1,000 a day, right? And a day for a truck is only 11 hours because I can only drive 11 hours. So you're asking to detain me for 11 plus hours. So now you're costing me $1,000. And then most importantly, you're costing me the load that I booked with Carolyn that might be able to get me home for the weekend because it's Thursday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and I've already got a load planned for the weekend. Or guess what? I got an insurance premium that's coming up in about 3.5 days. And I was counting on that load that Carolyn that booked with me, that load. It was going to take care of my insurance payment. Now I can't pay my insurance and there's no consequences to you, Mr. Shipper. You don't own my truck. I own my truck. And if there was any type of reprehensible activity, I would think that from a shipper perspective and a broker perspective, there needs to be an SOP or workflow that something like that's the case. I mean, it's something like we can't do some cross-docking. We can't do something like, so there's no other resolution but say, hey, I'm sorry for your inconvenience. This is my problem with that. And I hate to be going on a tangent about that, but that sign was pre-printed. Somebody took the time out to pre-print that sign and it said from 12 to 16 hours. So it tells me that's not the first time that happened before. And I've been at these shippers and these receivers before as a driver. And one thing I can tell you, Ken, and a lot of people on the broker side have never walked into a shipper or a receiver a day in their lives. When you walk into a facility that has something like this posted in, you can feel the inefficiency when you open the door. People laying around, you just feel the lack of processes, the lack of urgency and the lack of efficiency because you know what? I've got the truck. It's delivered here. We'll get to it when we get to it. That's a problem. You don't see that in the maritime space because they're held accountable. You don't see it in the rail space because they're held accountable to it. In the trucking industry because, and this is my opinion, because it's small carrier related and you have the big noise of your major Maersk and your Railroad Pacifics. Because it's the small guy, don't worry about it. You guys figure it out amongst yourselves. But I think it's a problem. And what really bugged me is that as I read through the comments within that LinkedIn post, you saw people who were very, hey, you know what, this is BS. This is something that, needs to be taken care of. But then you had some people like, what if the line went down? Or what if somebody called out sick? Or what if flooding? Okay, Caroline, what if we had that same energy where the driver got sick or the driver didn't know how to use his phone? You were still docking for that $250 for not using toll points, right? So that energy doesn't reciprocate, and that's one of my problems when it comes down to that.
Totally. There are no excuses for drivers, carriers, but all kinds of excuses when it comes to the shipper. Do you think, what is the solution for this? Is it technological? Is it political? Is it Cultural? What do you think the
So
solutions
there's,
are?
there's, there's a couple of ways. Political, I'd rather not be, because whenever you lean on politics to create solutions for a space like this, then it'll never be consistent. It'll never take flight because of that. And financial, number one. There's got to be financial accountability when it comes down to it. A shipper should be, and then I know that there's got to be a political aspect of it in order to enforce that. Financial is number one, most important. But number two, I've seen technology that's being played around with. I was in Manifest, Vegas this year, and one of the things I saw was they had this new unloading process where it's able to unload an entire trailer in 2 minutes, because the pallets all sit on this platform that a machine goes in and pulls all 24 pallets right off to the trailer at one time. It stages in the area the driver goes, and then a forklift driver comes and moves it to where it needs to go. So there is an understanding that needs to happen. I've seen artificial intelligence play a really key part in it, where they've got different ways that when a truck comes in, it actually scans the tag of the truck. It says, hey, here's your door. It tells you exactly what time you're going to be at the door, when they're going to start backing in. So technology is definitely going to take a place in it. When I look at warehouse inefficiency and I look at robotics and AI, I had hope. And I hate to say that from that perspective, and I'm going to tell you why. And this is going to get me in some trouble. So when you add robots and artificial intelligence into place, they don't get sick, they don't have call outs, they don't lose efficiency, they don't lower in performance, they don't have staffing issues. And I know COVID created a lot of staffing issues from a warehouse space, and now everybody wants to do other things. And you see where the wage gap is being pronounced more. People want more wages. It's really a weird space right now. But when you see warehouse automation in place, and we see companies that lean on warehouse automation and technology, their warehouses typically run on a much better scope. You don't see the detention issue. You don't see the efficiency issues. You don't see the unload time issues. You see a lot more, just a lot more efficient. So I think, to answer your question, financially, it's got to be something that is in place. And as a broker, if you're a broker that's listening to this and you think that $150 or $200 is enough to take care of the detention on a truck for 9 hours, then you need to come out here and you need to run a truck a day in your poor week and see how you can go home and feed your family from it. I think financial, number one. But number two, I think the adaptation and the acceptance of technology within these warehouses and manufacturing and just in the supply chain as a whole will help improve some of the things.
Now, I can kind of imagine why you thought you would get in trouble for that statement, because I can see a parallel using AI technology in. So tell me how that application might be different.
So it's a lot different because AI has different stages than incorporated in truck. When you think about AI is utilizing the dash cams that are in trucks. A lot of the dash cams are AI and AI powered. They'll, especially if they're in-cab facing, they can tell you if the driver's distracted, if the driver's falling asleep, if the driver's eating phone, if he's eating. Artificial intelligence can, if you got a fleet of 30 trucks and trying to identify, artificial intelligence can automatically identify what drivers and what truck. So there's a lot of things from that perspective. Also, in a collision mitigation standpoint, so it's providing driver assistance. So it can help in those areas of collision mitigation. It can help in smart crews. It can help in traffic when, you might be in standstill traffic. You can let your foot off the brake, and artificial intelligence can keep the space between you and the vehicle in front of you. So there's a lot of safety components of that. And I don't want to talk into the difference between that safety side and that, hey, I'm going to replace you with an artificial intelligence bot that can drive this truck and not fall asleep and drive 24 hours and not have to sit this truck, or which we know that's part of what the push is, right? We want to get driverless trucks. We want to, not read, but they want to see the efficiency improve, because a driverless truck is like having a team all day long, 365, that can run nonstop. But when it comes down to warehouse artificial intelligence, even though it's a similar desire to improve efficiency, okay? And when I'm talking about improving efficiency with an artificial intelligent truck versus an artificial warehouse, an artificial intelligent truck is only going to get you so far, but a full warehouse with the amount of shipments and the amount of deliveries that they receive per day, it'll impact the actual price at the actual grocery store, because that detention time that is funneled in and that well time that's funneled in, those, I hate to say, the labor hours that are used or funnel in, all that goes into the price of goods and services. I think that skill down effect is part of that. So artificial intelligence can take the warehouse space. It'll help the supply chain in a lot of different ways. And we just have to create smarter jobs from that perspective of, is there going to be a reduction in the most intensive labor job when you talk about robots? And I was looking at Walmart yesterday, and they had somebody I follow on social media was posting how they have the Walmart yard jockeys where this is autonomous yard jockeys switching trailers. Yeah, sure, it's going to remove those jobs, those repetitive, mundane, controlled environment jobs. We can already see that taking place. But those jobs are being replaced with folks that are responsible for maintaining the technology, for monitoring the technology, for providing feedback, being those safety people. So it's creating smarter jobs, and it's creating those smarter jobs. But things are changing. When I was growing up in Carolina, I'm gonna tell you my age. When I was a young kid, phone operators were a thing, right? You actually would pick up the telephone and you would have to call a phone operator who would connect you with another person. And when that went away, people like, oh my God, we're removing jobs, but we're not necessarily removing that job. We're making it better. We're making the whole process better. So I don't need to pick up the phone to dial an operator and then to connect with Caroline. You can just call Caroline and she can just pick up the phone. So it makes it better for us, better jobs with better technology, provide better seamless interactions and experiences.
Right. Absolutely. So you are really in the conversation around fraud in trucking. And Bobtail and our customers are also on the front lines of this issue. We saw a big spike in things like double brokering over the last 18 months or so. Freight theft is now getting a lot of attention. And I've seen that a lot of what you've addressed recently is about that topic. What are you hearing from carriers on the ground about this and how this is affecting their business?
Man, it's tough. I think one of the biggest things when you look at this particular freight space, and we've been in a freight recession for quite some time, every load counts. And if I broker a load with a broker who has no intent to pay or his double broker situation, that double brokered load or that broker that's got that MC and decided to do a no pay. I've had a couple of carriers that went out of business because of those brokers not being able to fulfill their end of the bargain. So it's tough on both sides. But I hate seeing is I'm starting to see a lot of your brokerages, and for every right reason, they're afraid that every carrier that's new or every carrier that they see that they haven't done business with before, they're apprehensive with doing business with them. And I think that because of that, we've got trigger shot with partnering and relationships and things of that nature. Because you're like, yeah, I just don't know who this person is. I've seen brokers saying, hey, I'm not going to deal with carriers from the state of Illinois or the state of California. I'm not going to onboard carriers that started a company in 2024. I hear a lot of things that are resonating as a general broad brush. That's ultimately, I understand what some of those demographics and those descriptions of what fraud traditionally has, but it's harming a lot of small folks right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, we see that all the time. The new carriers that are signing up to factor with Bobtail, that's their number one issue. How do I get loads? How do I get brokers to give me loads? What kind of advice would you have for carriers, new carriers coming in, or carriers that are based in states that are being discriminated against right now because, maybe a big fraud scandal coming out of their area?
So most importantly, when you first start now, you're going to have to work with maybe one or two, just a small group of brokers that'll do business here to improve yourself, right? And if I onboard with the brokerage and they give me the opportunity to run freight for them, I'm going to be on my game when it comes to being pickup and delivery on time. I'm going to be on my game when it comes to giving you your POD when you need it. I'm going to be on my game when it comes down to communication. I'm going to be on my game to make sure I give you any type of updates that's going on. I'm going to go above and beyond to show that, you know what, I'm committed to this. I'm going to do the right thing by you. And I'm going to ask you for feedback. I'm going to ask you for the opportunity to leave me a Google review or leave me a positive review somewhere so that way I can help build my business. I think that a lot of people that start trucking companies forget they're starting a business. And because of that, they forget about those little components, especially small businesses. Small businesses are graded down one thing, and that's reputation. Your reputation matters more than anything else as a small business owner. But guess what? As a trucking company owner, whether you have 1 truck or 10 trucks, you're still a small business operation. And you need to have that same type of feel, that same time of guidelines when it comes down to it. So when you first starting off, here's the thing. I see a lot of times where people want to start off and they say, hey, I'm only going to run this small area. Or I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do this. The next thing I would say, you got to pay your dues, right? You at the very beginning of any operation, you got to pay your dues. Yeah, it's going to suck for the first 6 months. You're going to go places you don't want to go. You're going to take loads that you don't want to take. You're going to deliver at times that you don't want to deliver. But at that time, you're building your foundation for success. And you're putting in those dues and you're paying your dues that are necessary in the very beginning. And it's almost like I say, compared to when you're building credit. When you turn 18, turn 19, nobody's going to give you a $900,000 house under credit. You got to build your credit up. You got to do the right things financially. You have to show what you can do and be responsible. It's the same thing as a small business owner, especially in the trucking industry, because fraud is so high. So just pay your dues. You got to pay your dues, and you got to build your reputation.
Yeah, absolutely not agree more. So last month, the ATA got an anti-cargo theft provision in the 2025 Department of Homeland Security funding bill, which was a direct $2 million to task force on supply chain fraud and theft. And another bill was just introduced this month, or last month rather, to build on that and get involvement from the FBI, get involvement from the U.S. Attorney General's office. Do you think that these actions are moving in the right direction? And you talked a little bit about how political or legal changes can be really difficult to enforce. What are some of the things that the industry itself could be doing to adopt technology or processes that would limit this kind of fraud without chastising new businesses and new carriers?
Well, I think the top firefighters in place, but we're not putting any processes in place to control and prevent these in the beginning. So let me give you an example. If I say, hey, Caroline, I'm going to start an airline company today. And me and you say, cool, we're going to go, we start an airline company, we get passengers on, we're getting ready to take our maiden voyage. And me as a pilot, I'm going to get on them. And I'm going to say, hey, passengers, all 150 of you, we're taking our maiden voyage. I'm excited to do it. But by the way, we haven't had our new entrance safety audit yet, and we haven't been verified by the FMCSA yet. But please, nobody, don't panic. Everything's going to be fine. If I were to give a 20-minute delay with the door open at the front of the cockpit, do you think that every single passenger on that plane would get off that plane? Probably absolutely correct. But if I was to tell you that I and you can start a trucking company today, we can buy a truck, buy a trailer, start getting freight and doing all that stuff, and none of our information necessarily has to be verified. We don't have to do a new entrance safety audit, though, because that new entrance safety audit is not done on fact. And it opens up the doors to have people be able to manipulate when without verification, I can create a company without you even knowing that it's really a company. And so because we don't catch it on the front side, we're saying, hey, we're going to put a task force. We got the anti-theft. All that's cool and all great. But how about we put some steps in the beginning to help funnel some of this stuff down so that way we can identify and we can actually really focus hardly on truly who those bad players are in the game. So that's the only thing that I think that from that, are we moving in the right direction? Yeah, but I think we're spending our resources on the backside and not just doing a good job in preventing those things on the front side.
I think that's right. I think that's a really smart synopsis of what's going on now. It is wild that you have to depend on other businesses or other industries to do this verification for you as a government. So the government kind of lets this system run free for people signing up for motor carrier authorities or brokerage authorities. And it's really easy to get one. And then you have to go. And there are things that carriers can do to legitimize their business, right? Put a real physical address, get a website. I saw you made a video about that the other day. Get yourself a nice, super simple website. It's not hard to do. I'm a marketer, and I'll tell you right now, a website is not hard to put together. And so there are things that you can do to legitimize your business, including getting a factoring service. If you get a factoring service, you're going to go through a know your business, know your customer process that verifies your identity, so that can help. But it would be much better that be a requirement when you set up a trucking company. That should be a requirement. There's all kinds of softwares that the government could put in place to verify your identity. I've had to do it before for a number of different things, right? Doing things remotely, and technology got adopted a lot more. I don't actually see this as an enormous technological problem. The technology is there. So I know you're not a huge fan of market prediction in trucking. Last week we hit a 2-year high rejection rate, but capacity is still slow to leave the market, and contract rates are still far above spot market rates. What does this tell us about the market, if anything, for small carriers? And is it even useful for small carriers follow these kinds of metrics?
Here's the thing. Data is good, and having data is good, but interpretation of the data is what really makes the difference. And one thing that I've noticed in the industry, there is no crystal ball, because of course you can't predict exit, and you can't predict the amount of exits to really be able to determine what the demand is going to look like on the freight market. you can predict, obviously, the demand of the actual product that's flown in, but you can't predict whether or not you're going to have an abundance of carriers that just decide to, hey, you're going to all get on MCs today, or you're going to can't predict an abundance of carriers just exit the marketplace. So I think that's what makes it very difficult. And when I think about the 2-year high on rejection rates, it reminds me of, okay, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Because you've heard these things before. Hey, it's getting better. We see a turnaround, and it's like the boy that cried wolf. So you got to be very careful with that. What it means to me from a slow exit standpoint, I saw an article the other day that I disagreed with. Okay. I disagreed with it because it really blamed the PPP, EIDL movement for carriers to be able to slowly exit out. But if you do the math and you break it down to the amount of carriers that got funding, not knowing what size carrier operation received the funding and the amounts based on the size of the trucking company, which made a big difference. But if I just broad brush it across everybody, whether it be a carrier with 1 truck or a carrier with 10,000 trucks, it averaged at $87,000. So we know that $87,000 per company, just average, which again, it's tough to say, okay, small carriers got more of the lion's share or they got more of the kitty share. What concerns me is that even if I say, hey, I got an injection of $50,000 in capital from COVID that I've been sitting on, $87,000 does not last in the trucking industry as an operator. And I can go out and I can do a DTF on one of my trucks right now, and it could cost me almost $15,000. And we're talking about COVID money that was injected back in 2020 and 2021. We're talking about 4 years later, and with the amount of change and things like that were happening, I just don't feel that's a good benchmark to say, that's it. What I will say is that with elevated rates, when we think about rates that were as high as we can rank, because we obviously we can only go by what we have recorded. Elevated rates allowed a lot of operators to put some money to the side. And a lot of operators were able to put the money to the side. A lot of us would be able to pay ahead on insurance premiums, maybe pay off equipment faster. It's going to take that time to bleed out, because when you provide that type of capital injection based on the operators for running for quite some time, then it's going to cause a slow bleed out. So I just think that ultimately, I think that the carriers, small carriers are resilient. A lot of these carriers, when you look at the NTI, about 230, 235, a lot of these carriers still have break-even points that are lower than the NTI. So that means that, hey, you know what? I might not be making a killing, but I'm at least making them over my break-even. I'm able to keep the lights on. I'm able to pay my bills. So while I'm not able to go out and buy me a new boat or buy me a new Mercedes, I can still keep my home in place. So I think ultimately what we're seeing a slow peel out, because, and there's a carrot out there too. If I hang on a little bit, they say rates going to change and they're going to flip. I might want to stick this out. Why the hell would I leave? I would want to make sure that I say, man, I want to be a part of that next turn. I want to be a part of the next wave. I've made it this far. I can hang on just a little bit longer. That's more of the issue than that.
Absolutely. What advice do you have for carriers who are trying to hang on, or how long they should wait to just call it quits?
You have to be smart. I think that, and I talked about this at F3 last year. I think that you have to don't continuously rob Peter to pay Paul. You don't want to continue to dig yourself in a hole, hoping that things are going to get better. Now, if you're able to maintain, like I said, you're not able to go out there and buy a Rolex or whatever, but you're able to just maintain and keep going. The signs are there, right? Markets swing just like pendulum swings, right? So the pendulum is obviously starting to swing, and we can see that. Do we know if it's going to be something long-term? We don't know. If we didn't know that COVID would have created a demand that we've never seen before and things of that nature. But I think you have to be smart. You have to have a fine line between being resilient and just not being realistic. And I think that as long as you have that prudence where you're looking at your numbers, you're looking at your math, you're looking at your overall situation and circumstance, I think that you'll know when it's time to get off that exit and shut it down for the night. But yeah, we do see that there are signs that say the market's moving in a better place. Diesel prices are down, rates are up in certain areas. I looked at some spot rates, and over the last 6 weeks, I saw an increase in spot rates 6 weeks in a row. So those are good signs, but I think that ultimately time is going to be one of the things that's just going to have to tell.
Now, one of the things that I've talked about with carriers, especially the really experienced people, is that the ups and downs of the market for experienced carriers that have their customers, that have those relationships, they've built those relationships over time, they've built up their safety record, they can haul things that other people can't. They have specialties in types of commodities that they can bring to market. They are not as affected by those ups and downs in the market. And one of the things that I've learned, especially from talking to people, we were at the Mid-America Truck Show in the spring, and we're talking to carriers every day, all day, is that even when the market is down, it's not down for everyone. There is still a lot of money to be made in trucking if you're positioning yourself over time and you're taking a long-term look at your business. And the other thing that I would say is to really analyze how you're making decisions as a business owner. So we actually talked to an expert in emotional intelligence who's worked for big corporations like FedEx and other big movers and shakers in the industry. And he said that even the top executive at top companies will make the wrong decisions at the wrong time because and if they're really excited and really ecstatic about how high rates are and they get blinded by that emotion, they might start buying trucks that they shouldn't at prices they shouldn't and interest rates they shouldn't. That's just one example of a decision, of a poor decision that you can make in the moment. And on the flip side, that when rates are really down, that they're not necessarily doing all of the analyzing and math that they need to really understand whether or not it does make sense to exit the market. And because you're just blinded by this sort of, oh, I just got to get any load I can. I've just got to put money in the bank. I've just got to get it. And so having that moment to take a pause, and this is something that this expert who works at 6 Seconds, which is a great organization all around emotional intelligence, says, take the pause and figure out how are you feeling right now and what is it making you want to do? And is that actually the right decision or not?
I totally agree. And I think that more importantly, anytime you make a decision with emotion, you're always going to make the worst decision. And to me, if I can measure it, I can improve it. And I just remember even going through my short-term memory during the pandemic, I remember folks was out there excited about finally finding a truck because inventories were so thin, they couldn't find trucks. And I saw these dealers out there and they were running these prices up to $120,000, $130,000, which I knew was just going to be a straight collapse. Banks were just approving these folk because of that. It was just so much going on from that perspective that, you like you said, the emotion played into the decision, right? So it was like, hey, you know what? These rates are going to sustain me. I'll buy a $130,000 truck and take a $3,000 a month truck payment because I'm going to be able to make it. And then when the rates went down, then I think that was a telltale sign that those decisions were incorrect. Emotional decisions versus data decisions, obviously, are always going to be at a disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of potential decisions you can make about your business, I saw this on a Facebook group, a post about car hauling, and wanted to get your thoughts on this. So it says, how to get passive income in car hauling. Truck owners, we have great news for you. Now you can earn passive income by putting your tractors to work in car hauling. This is an ideal way to earn without spending a lot of time and effort. How does it work? 1, hand over your tractor. Give us your truck and our professional drivers will take care of all of the work. 2, generate income. You will earn a steady income from us using your truck in car transportation. And 3, no unnecessary worries. We will take care of all operational issues, maintenance, and management. Saw this and wanted to get your thoughts on this. What does this make you think when you see something like this?
I've been curious if that kid, but I think that I'll say this, there's no such thing as passive income in trucking. Trucking is not this is not one of those industries where it's hands-on. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So I'm going to give you an example. So I follow a lot of different economical folks in a variety of different industries. And one of the folks that I engage with a lot is in the car business, right? And one of the things, and he's really bullish one way or the other when it comes down to it, in his opinion. But one of the things that he mentioned to me that was just so pronounced, and he was like, if you realize that interest rates that are on perfect credit applications these days, it would blow your mind. So interest rates are about 8% perfect credit, 8%. The average American consumer doesn't fall under perfect credit. Number 2, Americans are holding their cars longer. So what am I telling you? Number 1, what I'm telling you for my car haulers out there is that number one, people can't afford to get loans on cars now like they were able to get loans 2 years ago. So number two, from an emotional perspective, they're more apprehensive on buying cars now. If you notice, dealerships are starting to swell with inventory, okay? That means they don't have what? Demand. So I'm addressing a long-term and an actual contributor to demand, okay? People can't afford it, and guess what? They can't get loans on it, and they're holding on their cars longer. So that doesn't mean that there's a demand that's turning that requires that demand. Then on the flip side, we're going to turn a deaf ear to that, and we're going to put that over here. On the flip side, we got people say, hey, come get in the car hauler, man. It's passive, and you can make a ton of money if you don't do anything. So now what we're doing is we're increasing supply, right? So we're providing people with a falsity of an opportunity, and we're swelling supply. So now when we had a load to truck ratio of maybe 2-to-1, because we had two car loads for every tractor, now because we don't have as many car loads available, now we have more tractors to fight with. I wanted to paint a micro supply and demand lesson before I answered that question, because I want the listeners to be able to understand what they're looking at when it comes down to it. But most important, there is nothing in this industry that's passive. You have to bust your butt. You got to work. You got to put in the work. You got to put in the relationships. There are people that got really wealthy in this industry by telling people, hey, give me your money and let me handle your business and I'll run it for you. And it made them rich, right? It'll make me rich, but in your world, it's gonna put you at the poorhouse. These passive opportunities, you have to be very careful, because I've seen some of these passive opportunities where they say, hey, Caroline, it's going to cost you $50,000 in your truck. Now we're taking away from people, and I'm just not a fan of coming out and saying, hey, get passive income in trucking without providing a full scope of dynamics and what regards to me. Tell me all of the bad stuff. This is not the stock market. It's not like I can buy 100 shares here and I don't have to worry about it. Passive income is that. I don't have to do anything. It does it by itself. This is not that. And I just wanted to make sure that people understood that.
Absolutely. I don't think there is any such thing as passive income in any industry. The only exception might be buying a government bond, maybe.
T-bond,
and that's about it. Because even if you're buying stocks or you're buying mutual funds, or that, you got to still pay attention to it. Now, is it more passive than owning a business? Sure, but you're still having to pay attention to it. You might be, if you're probably paying someone to manage it for you, and they're managing it and you got to manage them. And it only gets less passive and more active from there. So I would say huge red flag anytime you see the words passive income related to trucking. The other thing is that car hauling is no joke. Car hauling you have to have special insurance for that. You have to have the right authority. A lot of it is paid in cash. And so you have to be making sure that you get paid on time, and that they're not trying to convince you to factor the load, because really most car hauling is in cash. That's why at Bobtail we don't factor those loads.
Yeah.
You can do it. We don't stop you from doing them, but we don't factor them because it's just not common that they'll or invoice that load. Usually it's all in cash. And there's tons of liability, and be really careful unless you're, you've got experience in that. You really trust the person who's offering to do this for you. But when I see stuff like this on Facebook,
and unfortunately, it grabs a lot of people, and a lot of people end up being fall victim to it. We talked about car hauling being cash. I've seen situations, and a lot of situations, where a car hauler or an owner operator will accept a check from that person, and they close the bank account, and now they don't get paid. There's so many things, there's so many dynamics of it. A single car is not going to pay more than maybe 50, 60 cents a mile. So it's just so much when it comes down to it. So just do your research, do your homework. Those that are doing it, they do and do it at a high level, I commend, and there's a niche for everybody. But if you sit there and tell me that, hey, give me the keys to your truck, and with that I have some enrollment fee, and I'm going to get paid passively, and I don't have to do anything, and everything is going to be great, and every month I'm going to make $5,000 to $6,000, I don't believe you. I'm sorry, I just don't.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam, for joining us for This Week in Trucking. We said we would be under 30 minutes, but really appreciate all the time that you gave to us today, and hope to see you very soon.
No problem. Thanks for having me.